Indeed, and we are joined by Ambassador Sanjay Bhattacharya, former Secretary from the Ministry of External Affairs, joining us on Zoom link from New Delhi, and Meena Singh Roy, former HOD, West Asia, JNU, also joining us on Zoom from Gurugram. Well, so thank you very much, both of you, for being with us. Ambassador Bhattacharya, let me start by you. Cultural connection seems to be pretty vital when we see that, the centuries-old relations. There was a time when the rupee was legal tender in Kuwait. Can you put into context the kind of cultural connection between the two countries?
Well, as you know, firstly, thank you so much for having me on this program on the occasion of Prime Minister's very historic visit to Kuwait. India and Kuwait share a very deep relationship which goes back into a civilizational context. As you know, India and Kuwait, that region that is part of Arabia, have had contact since the very beginning, and people have been traveling back and forth. The western coast of India has been home to many of them, like a second home. In fact, the Emir himself had a home in Bombay for a very long period of time. And as you mentioned, till 1961, the Indian rupee was also legal tender. But today, these have assumed a very new context, because apart from the trade and philosophical exchanges that the two sides have had between the Arab Peninsula, Kuwait in particular, and India, today we find that this is diversified into a much more modern context. And therefore, the spread of Indian cinema, for instance, the Indian arts and culture, Indian music, dance, yoga is very, very much popular today over there. And we find that there is great interest amongst the Arab people, the Kuwaitis who are natives of that land, in our culture as well. You notice, for instance, how our friends over there have translated the Ramayana and Mahabharata. And this is true for many, many other texts. For instance, many of the works of Rabindranath Tagore have been translated over there, and they are studied as part of the curriculum. The same goes true for a lot of Mahatma Gandhi's works. And so the connect is deep.
Professor Roy, coming to you. Now, after a long, in fact, rather a very long gap of 43 years, we have an Indian Prime Minister visiting that part of the globe, and especially under the leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Diplomatically speaking, how significant is this in terms of India and its significant Gulf outreach?
I think this is much, needed and awaited visit of Prime Minister, which was actually, a lot of expectation from the Gulf states. If we look at, the success story of Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji to the West Asian region, I think, two major countries, have been very close partners of India. The GCC countries, as was mentioned, mainly Saudi Arabia and UAE, Oman. So I think Kuwait was one country where there was a lot of expectation. He was supposed to go in 22, and then finally he's there at a time when, the whole region is witnessing the conflicts and, a very critical time for Prime Minister.
Right. We seem to have a bad connection with you, ma'am.
Ambassador can continue. Sir, if you could hear us, significance in terms of Gulf outreach.
Yeah, in terms of Gulf outreach.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, please go ahead.
Right. So I think it is very important from the context that we are looking at building closer partnership with the GCC countries mainly. And Kuwait, if we look at the geography, if we look at the resources, if we look at the diaspora, I think from all three aspects, I would say it's a very, very significant visit. You already mentioned 43 years we never had the Prime Minister, the high-level visit. So from that context is very important. From the regional context, it is very important. And thirdly, it is very important from the bilateral point of view. So I think all three aspects that we're looking at it is a very, very significant visit, and I'm sure it will have a lot of impact. There have been some issues when we are talking about the Kuwait particularly, and with the personal connect that Prime Minister Modi has been able to very successfully achieve. I'm sure that this visit is going to deliver desired results as we are looking at it.
Right. Professor Roy, you did mention about the conflicts. Now, you know, India, of course, with such a large population or people of Indian origin living in this region, is personally invested in the entire region. But also, you know, the fact that India is neutral in these conflicts, and India plays a role of peace. How is this, you know, going to play out in terms of the Prime Minister's visit?
I would say, you know, when we look at the entire region, there are areas of conflicts, there are areas of stability. And when we are looking at the Gulf partner countries, there is, I would say, comparatively, you know, stable, you know, life that we see unfolding out there. So the conflict zones have to be dealt with. Now, India has moved, you know, from a very silent, actor to a very proactive and an active country today. Regionally also, you know, there is a sea change, I would say. There is a paradigm shift in terms of what is the image of India in the region, and how there are growing expectation, not only globally, but even regionally. I think India will have to have a very, very balanced approach. But at the same time, you know, given its image, given Prime Minister Modi's image, and his ability to deal with, the conflict ridden, area, and also with the personal connect with all of them.
Okay,
I mean, India has good relations with Palestine. India has good relations
Yes.
with Israel, with Iran, with Saudi Arabia. And, you know, India has navigated its relationship very smartly.
In fact, ma'am, you yourself spoke about it. Now, if you carefully look at the Kuwait Declaration, Ambassador, the GCC countries have taken a very strong position in terms of ending the conflict. Special mention, the war in Gaza, occupation of Palestinian territories, and India has always advocated the path of dialogue and peace. And in that sense of term, how significant is Prime Minister Modi's two-day visit in Gulf, in Kuwait, from their point of view?
So from my perspective, I think Prime Minister basically has two primary objectives. The first one is obviously to strengthen our bilateral relations with Kuwait. And this again has two specific components. One is to consolidate the partnership that we've built over time, which is largely based on energy security, the human security of people going back and forth, and trade. And at the same time, the second priority within the bilateral context is to put a focus on how we build this into a future-oriented partnership. You know, the kind of partnership that we have built with the United Arab Emirates, for instance, and with Saudi, and with some others as well in the region. So how do we leverage, as the Gulf economies change their complexion from hydrocarbon-based towards a more diverse economy? And what is the kind of role that India can play in their change and the role that they play in our change? The second big priority that Prime Minister had, and this directly alludes to the context that you brought up, is the regional issue. And as my co-panelist has pointed out, this is really a very transformative period for the region. On and we have a war that has been going on in between Israel and Palestine.
Correct.
We have, of course, already mentioned that we do not want the war to continue and that we must find ways to find peace. And the second one, which has happened very recently, is the very remarkable changeover of governance in Syria, which is, right immediately to the northwest of Kuwait. And this has been a very serious
important.
The old establishment of Bashar Assad has been overthrown by the HTS, who have now taken command. So I think an assessment of the regional situation is something that Prime Minister will do with the Kuwaiti leaders to get an understanding and to share our views, because I think we are not neutral. I think we are friendly towards all. And I think there's a big difference between the two. We are a very positive force in the region. And I think at a time when so much of change is happening, people are looking for leadership. And I think Prime Minister can provide that guidance to that region. Also, at the same time, what we find is that the regional powers over there, be they, Iran or Turkey, are having certain ambitions and certain other ideas about how.
So basically, Ambassador, we'll have we have 2 to 3 hours to discuss this.
Yeah.
But basically, there are